I'm David Cobb of Cooperation Humboldt, and welcome to the program Cooperation Humboldt, where we talk about, explore, and imagine what a genuine cooperative society could and can look like. Today I'm joined by Emily Kawano. Emily is the founder and co-director of the Solidarity Economy Network and the current director of the Wellspring Cooperative. Emily Kawano, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here.
Well, thank you, Emily. So I have the privilege of knowing you personally and having known you for quite some time, but I'd like to give the audience an opportunity to get to know Emily the person. How did you come to do this work? Who are you and why do you do what you do?
Well, let's see. I guess, first of all, I'm a second-generation cooperator. So my father worked he managed a cooperative grocery store, a food co-op, and sort of politically, I certainly am a child of my family, sort of continued on a very liberal, progressive to radical sort of orientation. And I became an economist because I felt like I could study many things on my own, but I probably couldn't learn economics on my own. I went from being an economist to working very closely with the Center for Popular Economics.
But before we go there, What's interesting to me was you were actually a university economics professor, yes?
Professor? I taught, but I was not a professor. So I've taught at the university level. So I've taught at UMass, I taught at Smith. But I went to graduate school with the intention of becoming a more effective activist. And I felt like economics is important. I didn't quite understand it. I wanted to deepen my knowledge to make me more effective in terms of social movements. So for a while, I certainly got sucked into the track of academia, but I didn't stay there very long and eventually returned to more grassroots work, which is where I always wanted to be.
And so in your grassroots work, you've been incubating cooperatives and building a solidarity economy. I'd love for you to share, in a nutshell, what's the difference between a cooperative business and a normal for-profit business?
So a worker cooperative is owned by its workers. And so the workers make the decisions about how it's run. They make decisions over how the profits are shared. And they make decisions about how to grow it, whether to grow it, investment, all that kind of stuff. In a conventional business, you have this inherent class structure where you have an owner, the capitalist, and you have workers. And they work for a wage, and they produce more than they're paid in a wage. That's where the surplus comes from. It accrues to the owner. Maybe the owner is nice and shares it out with workers. But at the end of the day, it's the prerogative of the owner. And the workers can fight for a bigger share of the pie or a bigger voice, but inherently that kind of a capitalist structure has this class conflict. And a worker cooperative eliminates that in that the workers are the owners.
So in essence, in terms of a worker co-op, then really the defining characteristics is who owns the thing. Who
owns and controls it, for sure.
Fantastic. Now, you've been involved as a social change agent and a community activist for quite a while, and it seems like everywhere I turn, the cooperative movement is just growing, and you can't pick up a magazine without reading about it. I mean, something is really happening. I don't want to embarrass you, but Emily, you were a big part of the reason that the cooperative movement is actually networking and actually has a coherent voice. Tell me how that process worked. How did we go from individual co-ops to a full-fledged movement?
Oh, I don't know that I would agree with that analysis. Thank you very much. That's very generous. But certainly I've been involved in the cooperative movement for quite some time. I think that one of the reasons that it's experiencing this huge upsurge is the economic crisis 2007, 2008 really sort of fundamentally shook people's faith in our economic system. And so that's part of it. People are looking for other ways forward, because this system is not working for most people. So this kind of low-level crisis of unemployment, underemployment, precarity, right? Just not earning enough, having to have 2 or 3 jobs. That's been going on for a long time, but it hit this crisis point with a global meltdown. And so people are much more open to different ways of doing things.
And, you know, Emily, I think part of the reason that I think of you as such a towering figure is I met you in Atlanta, Georgia in 2007. And you were clearly one of the key people, and that was, of course, at the U.S. Social Forum. And some interesting things happened at the U.S. Social Forum. I'd love for you to share with the audience about that.
Yeah, so I was involved in pulling together a track of workshops under the umbrella of Solidarity Economy. And then we had a series of meetings there as well. And out of those meetings emerged an agreement to form the U.S. Solidarity Economy Network. So that I will say, yes, I was definitely there in the beginning and one of the founders of U.S. SEN. I guess the thing about the co-op movement is that some of that coming together and politicizing and networking, really forming a co-op, worker co-op movement, that had been going on, bubbling away, right?
Yes, and I'm glad that your modesty is appreciated. And I guess the point that I want to make is what I have now learned is there have been co-ops since the founding of this country and you know from way before. Right. But something happened when the Solidarity Economy Network formed that was it wasn't just about co-ops are better than for-profit businesses. There was a very conscious political decision in creating the U.S. Solidarity Economy Network.
Right. Really looking at system change. And so just to do the little, make sure we're all on the same page in terms of defining solidarity economy, it is seeking a post-capitalist future, right? So solidarity economy would clearly hold that capitalism is not going to get us to that just, democratic, sustainable future that we're hoping for, that we're envisioning. So clearly post-capitalist.
So I want to stop for a moment because I really appreciate, oftentimes when I have these conversations, I and others will say anti-capitalist. You almost always talk about post-capitalist. So is that just a rhetorical flourish, or is there a fundamental difference between anti-capitalism and post-capitalism?
I think I find it more useful to think about post-capitalism, acknowledging that capitalism, for all its ills and for all the negative outcomes and all the oppression that it creates, it also has set some conditions, right? It has set some conditions of productivity and innovation that will enable this next system to unfold. So I see it as a progression, right? And the transition from one system to another is, right, the new is built on the old, right? So it's not just like capitalism just sucks, let's do away with everything. It's rather what can we build on within capitalism, but really fundamentally change it so that it is no longer capitalism.
The phrase that I often use is, and have heard, obviously I didn't create it, but that you build the new society within the shell of the old. So the Solidarity Economy Network, the principles of a solidarity economy, number one is it is post-capitalist. It is transcending or the next system beyond capitalism. What else?
So 3 things. One, it is a set of practices, a set of broad practices that align with values. So the practices, some are old, some are new, alternative, some are mainstream, some are alternative. And they exist in all spheres, all economic spheres. So things like in production, worker co-ops, but also DIY. We also embrace...
That's do it yourself.
Thank you, yes. Also things like non-waged care work. We would embrace as an important part of the economy. It has real value, should be supported and valued, even if it isn't
Commodified.
done for money.
Right.
Things in distribution and exchange, social currencies, time banking, in consumption, things like food co-ops, collective forms of consumptions, community land trusts, co-housing, things like that, cooperative housing. In finance, there's lots of credit unions are a cooperative by definition, but there's lots of other collective, democratically controlled financial institutions. So those are, and then systems of governance, things like participatory budgeting, right? So there's lots and lots and lots of things to build on. There's a huge foundation of practices that the solidarity economy would embrace. What is that universe defined as? That universe of practices is defined as aligning with solidarity economy values.
So before we go into the values, I think it's really important to underscore and make sure that I'm clear and our audience is clear that a solidarity economy is actually rooted in concrete things that you're doing to meet people's needs. This is not merely a theoretical concept. I mean, theory is important to explain and understand the world, but you've really anchored us on these are the concrete things that you do and practice in order to manifest a solidarity economy.
Absolutely. I've heard it described as a theory in search of practice, right? So there is a theory, there is a concept, there is a framework, and it is really starting with, well, what exists out there in the world that's working that aligns with these principles.
So Emily, tell us about the principles of a solidarity economy.
So the principles will look a little different places, but in the U.S. Solidarity Economy Network, we use 5. So one is solidarity, cooperation, mutualism, et cetera. The second is participatory democracy, so not just electoral democracy, but there should be democracy in the workplace, there should be democracy in the community, et cetera. The third is equity. We talk about equity in all dimensions, race, class, gender, et cetera.
So equity, do you mean just fairness, or is there something deeper to the concept of equity across all dimensions?
So say a little more about what your question is.
Well, when you say equity, I'm wondering, do you mean just equality? Do you mean something different?
So I'll do the equity versus equality thing, if that's where you're getting at.
I am.
Right. So equality, I love the picture of there's a fence, there's a ball game going on, there's 3 kids and they're trying to see the ball game. So equality would look like everybody gets the same box, right? To stand on. And the little one still can't see over, the one can barely peek, and the one who's tall can easily see, right? So that's equality. Everybody gets the same thing. And equity would allow for the differences in their height. So the little one gets a taller box.
Or 2 or 3 boxes.
Yeah, exactly. So everybody gets a box or boxes so that
but
everybody
the tall kid doesn't even need a box.
Right, maybe they don't even need a box. Exactly.
Of course, and then I don't know if you've seen this one, but that's equity. Liberation is when we tear down the whole fence. But that's a different conversation.
Sometimes we need a fence, right?
We do sometimes.
Want to get whacked by that ball.
Right. Like, no, but that's the question, right? And in a participatory sense, collectively we would decide when we need a fence, and we would decide those sorts of things.
True.
But I appreciate your distinction between a definition of equity. So we're talking about participatory, we're talking about equity in all dimensions, race, gender, sexual orientation.
Sustainability. And then the last one is pluralism, which means that it's not a one-size-fits-all model. We don't have a blueprint. Different things are going to work in different places, different cultures, different political, economic realities, different times. And it's inherently humble. Like, let's be clear where we're headed, right? Well, let's be clear on our values, but let's not tear each other apart with, no, I have the right answer. No, I mean, a little bit, we have to all be a little humble and see what actually works.
You know, Emily, one of the things that I've just been so grateful for, pleased with, and really inspired by my engagement with the Solidarity Economy Network is the fact that it is not dogmatic. There is an absolute commitment to the core principles and values that you've just described. There is a commitment that it has to be grounded in practice. But I have never seen anybody like dismiss or denigrate somebody else's practice, even if it's not what they do. I mean, it really has been incredibly gratifying to work with a group of people who actually live those kinds of approaches.
Yeah. I would say for me, it was liberating for me in that I didn't have to say, oh, I'm this kind of a Marxist or I'm this kind of a socialist. And I could say, markets, let's talk, right? I'm not quite sure what I think about markets, or, you know, I really appreciate that I don't have to, it's a big tent. There are lots of questions and there's a curiosity, or there should be a curiosity. Let's welcome the debate instead of having such an investment in being right.
So a solidarity economy is post-Marxist, post-capitalist.
Yep.
It is definitely going to be a new economic system. It is grounded in concrete practices to meet people's tangible needs. It comes out of a core set of values. Is there another component part to the solidarity economy?
So I guess along with the values, I would say it's a framework that's defined by these values. It's a framework that pulls these practices together so that you can envision the system, right? So you can articulate a system, because right now, all these nice, you know, many of them are alternatives. They're considered fringe, and they're sundered from each other. But if you really looked at how much exists, right, like if you include non-waged labor, care labor, et cetera. I mean, we all do this, right? We all take care of our parents, or we take care of our kids, or we take care of our siblings, or we take care of people in our community. We're all engaged in that, right? So that's a huge foundation. But all these other forms as well. There's just a huge amount to build on if the pieces can recognize each other as engaged in the same project and pulling in the same direction, even though there might be somewhat different tactics. So one, it is a set of practices. The set of practices is bound together by a particular framework that's grounded in these values. And the third thing that it is, it's a global movement. I'll talk a little bit about the international network, which is REPES, which makes sense in Spanish and French, but not so much in English. It's basically the intercontinental network for the social solidarity economy. And REPES has continental networks that are comprised in turn of solidarity economy organizations and networks. So REPES exists on all the continents with the exception of Antarctica, but hopefully we're getting there. And there are, not only is it very much informed by the sort of grassroots and bottom-up real-world experiences, it also has succeeded in different countries in gaining a lot of ground. So there are some countries that have departments of solidarity economy. There are some countries that have national framework legislation in support of solidarity economy. So the government is required to support solidarity economy through purchasing or through employment or through investment, right? So that's pretty impressive. You know, for whatever it's worth, the UN has a task force on solidarity economy. The International Labor Organization runs a solidarity economy academy every year. So there is a lot of there, right? Yeah.
So that's the international framework. I want to give you a moment to talk about some of the exciting things that you're doing both in Western Massachusetts and the statewide network that's beginning to form.
Yeah, I'll talk about the statewide first.
Okay.
So there's a lot that's going on in Massachusetts. And we have had a few meetings over the years, right? Mostly the centers being Boston, Worcester, Central Mass, and then Western Mass. So we've had a few get-togethers, but most recently there's been a more concerted effort to sustain something. So we had a meeting about a year ago. Actually, we brought one of your next guests up, Kali came up because solidarity economy had been pretty focused on the practice piece, right? Let's talk about the build piece, right? Building these alternatives so that we actually have experience and practice in these post-capitalist practices, right? So what we found really interesting about Cooperation Jackson is the marriage between building a solidarity economy, the practice, engaging in a political electoral strategy, and then doing the grassroots organizing, the community organizing. And it seemed, I mean, that was entirely consistent with solidarity economy's line, but in reality, we haven't been, at least in the United States, I would say solidarity economy hasn't been quite as successful in engaging in the political electoral and in the sort of connection with social movement. The will has always been there, but just actually doing that hadn't really happened. So that was part of the intention.
One of the things that I found is that both government, the state, and policies themselves can either facilitate the development of solidarity economy principles and practices or hinder the development. So to me, that's why it's not either or. It's like we ought to be paying some attention to the policies both at the municipal, state, and federal level.
Right. Absolutely.
It just seems important. Tell me a little bit about what's going on at Wellspring.
Let me just finish up the statewide. So a year ago, we had this meeting. Kali came up. We did talk about these three spheres and trying to join them up so as to be more effective in general. And so a year later, just let's see, what are we? Mid-March, we had a follow-up meeting, statewide, 2-day meeting. The first part was focused on worker co-ops, which are an important backbone of solidarity economy. Not the only, but an important piece. And the second day, that fed into the second day, which was focused on solidarity economy. And out of that second day, there was an enthusiastic agreement that we should form the Massachusetts Solidarity Economy Network. So as far as I know, it's the first statewide Solidarity Economy Network.
So get busy, California, we can be second.
Right. And there's a number of working groups. I'm part of the Solidarity Economy Education Working Group. And later this month, we're going to be doing a training of trainers. So, things are rolling. I'm really excited to have this, statewide coordination going on. I think that's really important work. Yeah.
What's happening in Western Mass that we here in Humboldt might learn from or replicate?
So yeah, I can talk a little bit about my day job, which is I'm the co-director of Wellspring Cooperative. It's a nonprofit. We're developing a network of worker-owned businesses in Springfield, Massachusetts, which is the third largest city in Massachusetts, plagued by, all those ills of a deindustrialized city. So our target population communities are Springfield's underserved communities. We have 4 businesses in our network so far. One does upholstery work, like they could reupholster these chairs, mostly for hospitals and colleges. We have a women-owned window restoration co-op. They take old wooden windows and restore them. Our third is a 1/4-acre hydroponic greenhouse, and we just started selling in August. We're in the local co-op markets, as well as the supermarkets, the school systems, some colleges, some hospitals. Our fourth one is this little bitty one that emerged out of our co-op boot camp. It's jumping jack hoops. They make hula hoops, and they do workshops for fun and therapy.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So there's more stuff in the pipeline. We're working on a shared use community kitchen, and various other.
But the point is that these are all worker-owned cooperatives where the workers are in charge of the fundamental decisions of production, how they're produced, marketing, the whole shebang.
Right, that's correct. Yeah.
Well, Emily Kawano, thank you so much for joining us here on Cooperation Humboldt. And I want to thank you, the viewer, for joining us on Cooperation Humboldt. And if you have been inspired, provoked, or just interested in learning more, I would invite you to go to our website, www.cooperationhumboldt.org, and join us as we experiment with how we can meet all of our needs to not just survive, but to thrive, to live rich and meaningful lives without exploiting or oppressing anyone, without allowing anybody to exploit or oppress us, and we can do it in an ecologically sustainable way. Thanks for joining us.